Welcome to another podcast here on Modern Military History. I, as always, am your host, Andy. Today we have a veteran with us. He's a retired lieutenant colonel of the Air Force, and his name is John Larrison. Mr. Larrison, thank you so much for coming on.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here.
Copy that, sir. So I want to start at the beginning. Sir, where were you born?
I was born in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1935 and grew up there through grade school, high school, went to college at Purdue before I left Indiana. After I graduated, worked 1 year as a flight test engineer. I got an aeronautical engineering degree, by the way. So I went to work for Boeing for a year prior to going on to active duty in the Air Force in pilot training, and graduated from pilot training and became an instructor pilot. Prior to my tour, I spent 5 years at Enid, Oklahoma. And from there is when I went to Vietnam for my tour there, which is primarily, I think, what you're going to be interested in.
Absolutely. And I'm also interested in growing up in the 30s and the 40s. You know, what was your childhood like?
Oh, it's a lot different than what things are now. Occasionally I get a video of, going the way back when, I call it. Without TV, it was radio, and kids, we played games outside, did a lot of running. And lately, most kids, you don't see them out playing in the yard and on the streets, ball in the streets, and Andy over, throwing balls over the thing, and steal the flag. And we had all kinds of outdoor games where you could play till dark and mom blew the whistle and you had to come in.
Were you
around 8 or 9 o'clock, and generally there was one good radio show before I had to go to sleep.
I gotta ask now, did you ever get in any trouble as a kid?
Oh, yes. I had my share of whippings and spankings, and I still do.
Oh, okay.
People tell me to be good. I say it's not in my job description. I don't think it ever was.
So you would have been right around 6 years old when Pearl Harbor happened. Do you have any memory of that?
Well, very vaguely that, but I know I was very active. My father had a neighborhood drugstore right out of the 40s and 50s, which I grew up. It had a large apartment over the drugstore where I grew up. And a lot of the high school kids then that went off to the military sent letters home. And I was very interested in aviation and airplanes. I was kind of monitoring a lot of the war efforts. I think as I recall, I was 10 years old when the war ended. And I was very interested in airplanes and so forth, and wanted to fly as long as I can remember. Gotcha. And got letters from those people that were overseas, and it was a very interesting time, and I wouldn't have missed it. Of course, couldn't do anything about it, but here I am. I lived through it, made it, and through a lot of little scrapes here and there, but here I am, and I'm 86, by the way.
Now, did you have any family members or anybody close who flew during the Second World War? I'm just kind of curious, as a kid growing up, did you have any kind of role models early in terms of military and flying?
Not close. My father, his age, he was sort of in a age bracket that he never got into the draft, so he did not have a military background. And mother was a college graduate also. And I didn't have any close ties with the military at that time. But airplanes, yes, I watched airplanes, anything I could do, aviation. My dad had a very good friend who was the airport manager there in Terre Haute, Indiana, a little field called Paul Cox Field, which is interesting. He was a World War I fighter pilot. I didn't realize it till just recent years. Somebody from hometown sent me a biography of Paul Cox at the airport. When he came back from World War I, he was instrumental in getting the airport built there in Terre Haute, had some airlines in and so forth and so on. And I'm also a member of the Dedalian organization, which
What's that? What's that?
It's you can look it up on the webpage. It's Dedalians. It's Greek mythology. Daedalus, the one that
Yeah.
That's who they named it after. It was organized by World War I fighter pilots in about shortly after World War I. They saw World War II on the horizon, and those that follow aviation, aviation was not looked on favorably during World War I. There's a lot of information. We flew airplanes, they did things, but the hierarchy didn't believe the airplane was that great. As you recall, Doolittle sinking the battleship that time just surprised everybody. But so they formed the organization to foster military aviation, and the Dedalians still do that today, that organization. And when I heard Paul Cox Field was World War I checked, and by golly, he was one of the founders of the Dedalians out of that. So our membership cards has a named founder, so I switched it to Paul Cox. And it's very interesting. There was some interesting aviation there in Terre Haute that I didn't realize till later. Wow. In fact, there's a little known place, let's see, it was an airfield in southern Indiana, Foster Field. And when they brought all the stuff back after World War II, the German airplanes and the rockets and everything, it was an Army airfield, and that's why there is a YouTube video on Foster Field, and it's about a 20-minute video where they had an open house and all the captured World War II aircraft and everything was there. Very interesting.
Oh, wow.
I would. It was there until several years ago when I
would be there if I.
Well, I was too, because I go back to Indiana to the 500-mile race. My dad and I went for years. He's passed on, by the way. But anyway, I said, I got to go there just like you. And reading on it, none of the aircraft or anything are there. They think they buried most of them. In fact, they went through a period where they dug holes all over the place. All they found was a few parts here and there. They still have a museum there, which I checked on and had a video on it. Most of the stuff they have is paper and pictures and so forth. So I wasn't that wild about going there, but hardly any hardware left.
Oh, man.
But it was, and I did not know about that growing up there. I can't believe that I missed that.
This really sounds like, well, first of all, I think, sir, that you and I should go in together and we should start digging holes. We should start an expedition. I am just a big World War II aviation nerd. I am big into, being able to go to the Smithsonian as a young kid and seeing the original German Me-262 that they have, the first operational jet aircraft that they have there at the Smithsonian was just amazing. It's something I'll never forget. But I have to ask you, sir, and this is just for fun. This is not scripted. Do you have a favorite World War II aircraft? Could be any nation. I'm just curious.
Probably the P-51. Spitfire would probably come in second.
Oh, yeah.
And those were famous. And, of course, the Germans had some good, the first jet, which I've done stuff on. They actually had, they had a rocket, too.
Oh, yeah.
That most people don't, they killed a few people with that, blowing it up because it had very dangerous fuel. Yeah. But it would launch off and zap right up to a high altitude, and then would make one or two passes on the bombers on its way gliding back down.
Wow!
And the jet engine in their first, it was a twin jet fighter. Interesting. When I went to Purdue in my aero class in the summer school, we had to take aircraft engines apart. One of them was a German Jumo, which was the engine out of that. And it's surprising how crude it was. The compressor, those people listening that know anything about an axial flow compressor in a jet engine, the compressor blades are very finely machined and have a Christmas tree effect where it fits in a groove. Their blades were actually just welded onto a drum, and it only had about a 25-hour life expectancy before it, destroyed itself.
Wow.
Because temperatures were critical in those parts, especially, for my aero engineering degrees, if you could increase the temperature of the tailpipe from the turbine blades, 5-10 degrees, it significantly increased the thrust available. So that was a big thing.
Wow.
One of my favorite things about my career, I learned the early engines, they ran the engines wet over the fuel, too much fuel through it to help cool the tailpipe. And my thermodynamics instructor called that thermodynamics diarrhea. Is how they cooled the engine. Things like that you learn. I don't remember a lot of my classroom instruction. Most of my education has been negative learning. I screwed it up, and you remember that stuff. But I do remember some of my engine course. I remember more than anybody else.
Copy that.
Anyway, back to your script.
I gotta, kind of circling back here to your career. I'm just getting a sense here, not only from your military career, but I mean, from being a young kid, fascinated with aircraft, getting your degree, learning how aircraft engines work, from the inside out. I'm just kind of curious, what was it that sparked this passion for you about aircraft? Do you have a specific memory, or do you have like a moment in time where you thought, I want to do that? Because your passion is just like, I just can't help but see it.
Well, I have thought about that many times myself. When, most people say, oh, there was a fork in the road, or I had a thesaurus or something, and this is what I want to do. I can't remember when I didn't want to be involved in aviation and fly airplanes. It goes back to, I am still fascinated at watching hawks and stuff gliding around through the air. I vividly, as a kid, I'd have dreams about being one of those birds flying around, so it was being an engineer. I'd never really liked school. I wasn't an A student. I was a borderline B at the best. But I just felt that being an aeronautical engineer was the way to go to get in a cockpit and fly airplanes. And I thought most of the Air Force pilots were aeronautical engineers. Well, I found out I was the exception. There were very few aeronautical engineers in my pilot training classes, which created a little bit of a problem for me in the academic courses because I would read too much into the questions. I knew too much. But I mentored helped a lot of my classmates get through the academic phase.
Was this before, forgive me, I just want to make sure I'm understanding kind of the chronology here. Did you get your degree before you entered military service or after?
Yes.
Okay, before.
After high school, when I went to Purdue was what they call a land-grant college. And if you're familiar with that, the land-grant colleges got a bunch of land and stuff from the government, and in trade, they said, we will have ROTC training, military training. Of course, this was back World War II period. And so all the males that went to a land-grant college like Purdue had to take 2 years of ROTC. And they had Navy, Air Force, and Army there. So I naturally went Air Force.
Yeah.
And at the end of the 2 years, you could apply for advanced ROTC, which I did, and was qualified and accepted into advanced training, which was leading on to pilot training. And when I graduated, I had a pilot training slot in the Air Force.
How excited were you to be a young man earning your degree and your passion in the ROTC for the Air Force, did you feel, I'm just kind of curious, was this like a super exciting time of your life, or how did you feel about moving forwards? Were you looking at the Air Force as a career at that point? I'm just kind of curious. This sounds like just the perfect place for you to be.
Well, I wanted to be a pilot, and that was the way to go. And when I graduated, the pilot training can't take all the graduates. The first month they graduate, they got to spread you out. I interviewed with companies, and Boeing Aircraft in Seattle offered me a job, and I applied for the fourth quarter entry into pilot training because I wanted to see what it was like work for a company. I don't think I was that smart, but at least my thought was at least I would know what it was like working for a company if I didn't like what I was doing in the Air Force.
Wow.
So I was a flight test engineer at Boeing on a B-52 for a little over 9 months.
What did that entail? Were you flying, or were you doing like engineering tests?
It was mainly engineering tests. We were doing service tests on the B-52. I think it was an E model then. And I really lucked out. They changed the electric system on the thing, put it from in the fuselage, which was hazardous, out to the engines. So they wanted to check the quality of the electric current being generated, because back then computers were analog computers, which were very sensitive to voltage and frequency. Well, the tail turret on the B-52, which most people are aware of, they have since moved the operator forward, but back then the tail gunner sat back there. And they wanted to check that out. So I was able, because of my background, and I had a pilot's license. I missed that. My last year at Purdue, the Air Force started a screening program. If you were going to pilot training, they had an FAA flight school on the base. And I went through that and got my private pilot's license when I graduated. So anyway, I got checked out in the tail turret of the B-52, and I flew several sorties there. I would, being a junior engineer, I had to write the test plan. And I would request, Boeing had 6 F-86s for chase planes. He would come up and make gunnery passes on me, and I could see if I could track him and check out the radar and so forth. And
this is so cool.
Fun and games. Yeah,
this is so cool. So you're flying test flights in a B-52, and you're testing out the tail turret, and F-86 Sabres are coming in, and they're making like test runs on you guys. That is so cool.
Yeah,
wow.
For quality, he'd make one from each of the 4 quadrants, and then a long straight in and measure the max distance when I could detect him and track him and so forth. And that only took about 15 minutes. And so we had more time and fuel. And so I would write in the test plan surprise passes. And we would play, I used to say this, cowboy and Indians. We'd play cowboy. He'd try and sneak in and shoot at me. And I'd say, well, bang, bang, I got you. And one time, this is humorous, I think, all of a sudden I'm looking and looking, and I can't find him. And all of a sudden, my whole windscreen was full of airplane, and this, that. He had joined up in formation under the B-52.
Oh.
And then powered back and slid back and raised up right in
my goodness. So he wanted to get you. He wanted to surprise you.
Oh, we had a lot of fun. It was fun. I look forward. I remember I looked forward to going to work and hated to go home of an evening. It was, as you well know, in the north up there in the winter, people talk about the weather in Seattle. Yeah, the weather during the winter is crappy. I went to work in the dark, came home in the dark.
Yes.
But when it rained, the weather says it rained, it's a drizzle. I've never had no thunderstorms. They never had a thunderstorm. So the weather wasn't anything, but it was really neat getting in the B-52 and flying up above the clouds while they're doing all the other testing, flying around for 4 or 5 hours and then coming back down, out of the sunshine. But I enjoyed the time there. And loved it. Like I told you earlier, I love the Northwest.
Yeah.
2 tours with the Canadians on Vancouver Island. if it wasn't so far from everybody I knew and everything, I would probably be in the Northwest today instead of Texas.
You know what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking that my inner recruiter, my inner military recruiter is looking at young you and all the things you have done and before even entering your service. And I'm just thinking, you know, how much longer can you wait at this point in your life until you can, you know, join the military and start doing this? Because this is incredible experience. I mean, you know what it's like to be in a bomber in a gunner capacity, and if you're going to enter the Air Force as a fighter pilot, I mean, that's invaluable experience right there on how to conduct yourself, you know, from the other side. You know about the vulnerabilities, you know how to do that. So how long did you wait until after Boeing you signed the paperwork and got into the military full scale?
Well, I knew I'd be coming in the fourth quarter. And at the time when I graduated, pilot training committed you to, I think, a year and a half, 2 years. While I was there, Boeing, I get a letter from the Air Force, typical, you know, they want to change the contract, said, if you want to go to pilot training, you got to sign up for 5 years. Well, I signed that letter, sent it back in right away. So when it was about 9, I entered pilot training. I graduated in class 59 H. 59, they went by, not by calendar years. So I actually graduated from pilot training in July of 59. And of course, when I went on active duty, I went to San Antonio for officer pre-flight. And then when I went through pilot training, they had the old contract schools. They called it primary and basic, 6 months of primary. I went to Malden, Missouri, little country airfield. Contract operations, civilian instructors, T-34, which is like a Bonanza, and then to a T-28, which is still flying around now. The Navy had them. I about 120 hours total. You graduate from that, and you're still a student pilot, and then you go to basic, which was the T-33 jets. I went to Webb Air Force Base in Big Spring, Texas, for my T-33 training, another 6 months. Did well there, graduated. That's when you got your wings and when you got your assignment. And in those days, you got to pick what you wanted. You'd go to auditorium. They'd list all the assignments up on the board, and the number one pilot in the class, based on grades, picked what he wanted. Normally, the fighters all went first, and the bombers went last. Well, I think we only got 1 or 2 fighters. I was third or fourth in the class. So they had a couple of the IP, instructor pilot assignments there. So I jumped on that. And out of that, I went to Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma as a T-33 flight instructor. Well, I went to instructor school at Craig, Alabama, Selma, Alabama. That was 3 months, and then went to be an instructor pilot in the T-33. And a lot of people say, well, you're an instructor, you don't get to fly the airplane. But believe me, if you've ever did instructing in almost anything, if you're any good, you're going to learn a hell of a lot. And I did very well. After about 2 years, the T-37 aircraft, the first jet trainer, small trainer, replaced the and they canceled the civilian contract and moved all the pilot training on the one base, T-37 and the T-33. So I was a senior instructor by then, 2 years, had a good record. So the guys like me, they selected us to go to the new airplane, the T-37, which we didn't like because it was a little slower and it didn't have the range. It was a short legs, as we say, about 400 or 500 mile, where the T-33, we could go about 800 or 900 miles for weekend cross countries. So I taught T-37s, which is interesting. I was talking to some of my pilot guys about soloing, you know, the civil area aviation. And we were soloing kids that had never flown before in a T-37 with 6-7 hours of flying time. Unbelievable. When I look back at it.
Jeez.
But anyway, my last year, I was there almost 5 years. The training command didn't want to let us go anywhere. They wouldn't let us apply for anything. And the academic instructor for engineering got short orders and left. They screened records, and there me, I stand out with an aeronautical engineering degree. I was a shoe-in. They said they tapped me to teach T-37 engineering to the classes, which was, I was unhappy with it, but when I look back at it, it was great. I got classroom stand-up instruction time. As you can tell, I don't hesitate to talk. I think that was part of it. I have no qualms about getting up in front of a bunch of people and talking. I think back to my instruction time, and I learned a lot doing that. And they sent me to squadron officer school down in Alabama. While I was there, my wife and Shirley called me and said, "You got orders." I said, "You got to be kidding." It was to Vietnam.
Really?
So I said, she was in base housing. I said, "Get out of housing, get your butt down here." And we spent the last couple of months there. And I went off to Vietnam for a year. It was a 1-year assignment.
Did you, I have to ask, during this time, while you are just, you're building up your hours in multiple types, instructing in multiple different ways, I have to ask, were you following the news at all about what was happening in Southeast Asia?
We had very little of that. It was close to the end during that T-37 time was when the Cuban crisis occurred. That was in the news a lot. In fact, I was on a weekend cross country going to Florida, which we went quite often. And we landed at Cecil Field in the center of Navy base, center of Florida. And they said, you can't RON, remain overnight. In fact, if I use acronyms, they asked me, RON, remain overnight. They said, we don't have a parking space or anything. We can refuel you and turn you around, but you got to go someplace else.
Because we were building up. I'm sure, I'm sorry. I'm sure it's because we were building up in case we had to strike.
Full. The ramp was full of airplanes. And we didn't know what was going on. It was only about the next day or two we found out that was the heart of the Cuban crisis, where I'm surprised Florida didn't sink. I swear half of it was in Florida, which was interesting thing. Hardly anybody knows about. But when I got into the Air Defense Command years later in the 101, we carried nuclear rockets, and they flew some of those to Florida, which was a no-no. And in fact, when the crisis was all over, if you check the history, there was a short period where they went to the highest DEFCON rating, DEFCON 1, for about 2 hours. And the only reason they did that, because then they could legally fly those nuclear weapons back to their bases. But I know a pilot who flew one down there, and he went out to his airplane and told the wing commander, I can't fly this. It's got a nuke on it, and we're still at DEFCON 2. And, get in that airplane and get your butt down there. We're on a court-martial. So the guys got in and flew them on down there.
I can't imagine.
A little side set. But anyway, Vietnam, I didn't know. I was at squadron officer school, and the big thing there was counterinsurgency training. And that was what I was at. So I got to Vietnam early, which is a whole other story. And they were still doing this, trying to win the hearts of the countrymen and all that stuff, and counterinsurgency, which it never worked. But that was the training. That's basically what I knew about Vietnam at the time. And when I was there, 80% of my flying was all in South Vietnam. We hadn't gone north yet. We didn't build up the jets and stuff until the middle of 1965, halfway through my career. And I just cover that part right now. The reason we were flying the old Navy A1 Skyraiders, which was a prop type airplane, was because it was a two-seater, and the Geneva Accords had words in it when the Vietnamese flipped through the French out of Vietnam, which was a colony of France. They put words in there, no modern weapons into Vietnam. So the United States wanted to support South Vietnam. How can we do it? We can't put our jets in there. So they looked around, and the Navy was phasing out some of their A1s, two-seater, perfect cover story. We're going to send them there as advisors, and they're training pilots. And we did train a few. It was a checkout. They got their pilot, their wings in the United States. The T-28s came to Vietnam, and our job was to check them out in the A1 and teach them air to ground, which was kind of ridiculous with a guy that only had about 150 hours flying. But that's what we did. And they finally took it out. But that's why we're flying the A1, and mostly all of our missions were generally air to ground, close air support with troops in the ground that were under attack, convoys and so forth. A lot of it was night fort defense, again, trying to win the heart and minds of the people. They had forts around the country, and they would bring everybody into the fort to protect them overnight. They go back out and work the fields during the day. And if the VC attacked the fort at night, we kept 2 airplanes on alert. We would scramble off and go out and drop a few bombs around to scare them off and orbit overhead until, if they tried to reattack, it wasn't uncommon to spend 3 or 4 hours over a fort at night.
I'm curious about, you've done, kind of going to, I just kind of want to ask you, so you have been doing aeronautical engineering. You've been flying in different types. Did you want to fly F4s? Did you want to do jet aircraft? Or were you wanting to do the A1?
No, I love the A1. It was a great airplane for the job and so forth. But I was number one in the training command when they sent me off to squadron officer school to get the next RF 101.
Can you explain for the people what the RF 101 was?
The RF 101 is the 101 voodoo. In the R, it means reconnaissance. It was take photos and so forth. It was a reconnaissance aircraft. They had an armed one. It was initially a nuke delivery aircraft. It was not really an air-to-ground aircraft. It was either an interceptor, which I flew the 101 later as an interceptor to basically get scrambled off and go shoot down Russian bombers if they came in. But the photo vision, it was used a lot in Vietnam. But when like I said, when I was there in squadron officer school, I got orders to go to Vietnam. And basically, I found out years later from NCOs that worked in personnel, it was because things weren't going well in Vietnam. We had secret, we use the word clandestine, which means secret missions prior to me going there in the end of 64, flying T-28s and A-30s, A-26s, which were World War I and trainer aircraft, which were old, and they weren't built for air to ground day in, day out. Some of them were falling apart. And there was one case where a guy flying an A-26 lost a wing, went in, was killed. His wife wrote a letter, and back in those days, Look and Life magazine were big on the newsstands. The letter was published, and it embarrassed the Air Force and everything about flying these old airplanes. And they looked around. That's when they said, hey, the A1 is the answer. We need to get good pilots to go fly it. So they screened records, and I showed up as a potential A1 pilot.
Did you have?
I was not a volunteer. A lot of people think it. But I'm glad I went. It was the best job I ever had, because as an engineer or in the Air Force, I'd write a report, turn it in, and wait weeks or months to find out whether I did good. In Vietnam, I could go out. There's troops on the ground that needed support. I could roll in there, drop napalm or bombs, and help them out. And when I pulled off, I could look back and see what I did. I didn't have to wait for somebody to tell me whether I did good or not. That was why I say it's the best job I ever had.
Did you have any flight? Did you have any hours in A1 before you went to Vietnam?
No, you went to Hurlburt. Well, I'd flown props, and I understood engines, which helped me a lot, because the jet guys, they didn't understand a lot of that stuff. Yeah. In fact, we had a problem early because they had run around with too much power. In a jet, you run around cruise power, in a high 80% of the engine RPM. In a prop tape, after takeoff, you pull back to about 75% of power, and you don't go by the tack, you go by the manifold pressure and so forth. And the jet guys were pushing it up, and we were wearing out engines real quick. We were finally, but it's funny, they'd push it up, and then the engine would overheat. It'd open the cowl flaps, and that would add drag and slow them down.
Yeah.
But it was so, and I'm still living with my aeronautical engineer. I still fly. Surprise, surprise. I have a home-built RV-8 experimental aircraft. It's my little A1. It cruises at the same speed as the A1, 155 knots, which is about almost 200 mile an hour. It's a tail wheel dragger, which like the A1, is fully acrobatic. So it's my little A1. And
I can't think of a scenario with your background of you not flying until like you just can't anymore. You know what I mean? I just can't foresee a scenario in which you would stop flying.
I figure I got maybe I thought I might sell it this summer, but I went past that. I'm the new is kind of, the thrill is kind of wore off, and I'm into so many other things. I do serious jewelry work as a hobby, and I haven't done enough of that lately. And the organizations I'm in, the A1 Association, the Medallions, and I'm president of a water company here. It has about half of our county, 7,000 connection. And I've been the president of that board of directors for a while. And I enjoy doing that. And one of the things for young people that watch this, I used to counsel people, there'll come a point in your career where job satisfaction becomes more important than salary or something like that. And in working with, after I retired, I worked for 2 or 3 major companies, GTE, Raytheon, and so forth, the big programs like the B1 ECM system, Millstar satellite system, actually the MX missile. And I came a point where the job satisfaction wasn't there. It was time to get on and do something else. So I came back to Texas, where my kids were still here. They were out of college then. And Texas was home to them, so we came back to Texas, and I'm still here. But that's come to a point where job satisfaction becomes a little more important than salary and so forth. Although early in your career, that's the big thing.
Gotcha.
But as you get older and you've done it all, maybe if you survive, which, like I say, negative learning, but I supplied. Yeah. But anyway, back to
Vietnam.
Okay,
no worries. So, what I'm really curious about is you arrive in Vietnam. You're going to be flying the A1, which you don't have hours in, but you sound like you're pretty confident in prop aircraft.
Yes.
So walk us through, getting assigned to the A1 and the first combat mission that you flew in the A1.
Well, like I say, you were all current in it. You knew your air to ground. Basically, it was a local area checkout. You flew 2 or 3 missions with an experienced pilot until they felt comfortable that you knew what the hell you were doing. And I don't know. I don't think I had more than a couple of them to learn the area and the proper local procedures. Not so much the air to ground stuff, because we all knew that. We had that down. Then we had 2 squadrons there at Benoit. I was in the 602nd Air Commando Squadron. We had the 1st Air Commandos there in another squadron. And that was about maybe 20 guys in each squadron. And like I said, we had about 3 or 4 students for a while till we finally got rid of them with the buildup. And we had some observers, we called them, that rode in the right seat. There were nothing but a body in case we crashed, which is kind of ridiculous. But that's
and these are the South Vietnamese pilots that you're quote unquote training, correct?
Yeah, it was mainly checkout and training.
Yeah,
they had their wings. They had very little flying. A few of them were upgrading from helicopters But mainly it was basically really students, not much fast students.
Did you ever develop a relationship with any of these guys that you had flying with you?
Yeah, the ones I was going through my memorabilia the other day and ran into a letter one of them wrote me. And I've got a good Vietnamese pilot who lives in Houston now, John Train. In fact, I haven't sent it to you yet because I haven't scanned it yet. He got his wings at Randolph Air Base here in San Antonio in '65, about the year I went to Vietnam in '64, and went to Vietnam and flew the A1, and then he upgraded into the A37 when they brought that in, the jet, and then he went to the F5, and he was a squadron commander. And when the North started overrunning the South, when we pulled out, he was called by General Key to Saigon for a conference. While he was there, they overran Bien Hoa and were attacking Saigon, Tan Son Nhut. It was under siege, fires and everything. He made it back on base, found an F5 that was operational, a crew chief that could start it. You had to have a start unit to start him. And he's got this story written up. Another pilot, it's a single seat fighter, a little fighter. Put him in the seat, he sat in his lap, and they flew out over to Thailand. Took the airplane, and both of them survived. He now lives in Houston. He was at our convention last time. I contacted him. He comes up for lunch once in a while.
Wow.
So, three of them that I know one of them lives right here in San Antonio, and the two of them are in Houston.
Wow.
And we've got last convention, we had about 5 of them that live in Florida area that came up to Fort Walton Beach because we were close to them.
These guys are heroes.
We have maintained contact with some of them.
I always love when the folks that I get to work with here on the podcast talk about their South Vietnamese counterparts, because I think not a lot of people understand or give credit to the truly remarkable people who served, the Vietnamese folks who served in the Vietnam War side by side with our guys. And this was he a captain, Mr. Trang? Was he a pilot, a captain? What was his rank?
Oh, I think he was a major then.
So Major Trang flew a guy out on his lap.
Yes.
Wow.
He said on takeoff, he said he couldn't get the stick back. It was jammed, and he just jerked on it. And what the problem was with the guy that he was sitting on his lap, he had his boot up under the rudder pedals.
Oh no!
and jammed the stick. So, but they got out. And there's other stories. The A1 has the blue room, the canopy behind it, the dual seat. There's stories about A1 pilots loading their family and everything and have 12 or 13 people stuffed in that blue room and flying them out over to Thailand.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And then there's that one that's been videoed of the one that flew a FAC aircraft, an OV-1, out and landed on the carrier with about 5 people, his family, in the back seat, jammed in there.
That's not trivial for people listening. Landing an OV-1 on a carrier overloaded that would be interesting.
With the carrier going 20, 30 knots, with the wind over the deck, hell, he probably didn't need more than 100 feet to land the thing. Man. That was no big problem.
So you're training guys. I'm curious, what was the first time that you went on a combat operation?
Probably within a week when I was there. What
was that like?
Yeah, I arrived at Bien Hoa in mid-December of '64. Coincidentally, it was the week before Bob Hope did his first show from Vietnam there at Bien Hoa. But like I said, a couple checkouts and away we went. And after a while, we would fly a student occasionally. If we had a hot mission, we would cancel student training, which was we caught hell over taking too long to train them. So we had to sit down and put a program together and get them trained and get them out of there. And then they finally moved that type program to Keesler down in Florida, which was where it ought to have been all along. It's ridiculous to do pilot training in the middle of a war. But we had a little range. We had some PSP, some old steel piled up down on the peninsula at Vong Tang, which was semi-secure. There wasn't too many VC down there. And we would take them down there and drop practice bombs, just like we did at Hurlburt, and get them checked out, sign them off, and then they go back to their Vietnamese squadron.
I'm curious about how much, what kind of anti-aircraft capability did the communists have at this point in the war?
In South Vietnam, most of our ground fire was probably 30 caliber, rifles. Occasionally, we would get a 50 caliber machine gun, which we would go after if we could. And in fact, if we lost it, and if an airplane went down, if we couldn't recover it, we would go down and bomb it and destroy it, because we did not want the VC to get the guns out of it. Because the A1 had Korean War vintage 20 millimeter cannon, which were not electrically driven like the current ones. They're the old percussion cap ammunition, just like a shotgun shell, only it was a 20 millimeter. And if they got a hold of one of them and got some ammo, which they could, build a tripod, which they could do.
Yeah.
And you got a tremendous 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gun.
Wow.
So we did not want them to get a hold of one of those.
Jeez.
Now, if you went north, it was a whole different story. They had, when my mission up to Thailand, when we set up the search and rescue over the...
Yeah, let's get into that. I would love to hear about how you got ordered to Udorn. And that story is incredible. And then that resulted in this SAR mission that you were a part of. Run us through that. Before, let's just get into that.
That's the one I sent you.
Yes, sir.
That was mid 65, right about the time the buildup started, and the F-100 showed up at Benoit. Prior to that, we had heard that they were flying 105s and 111s. And some F4s out of Karat in Cambodia, and which is north of or south of Thailand. But we didn't know much about it. Guys that knew people flying over there occasionally got a letter, so we pretty much knew there's something over there. They were going north on most of their sorties, and they were losing a fair number of airplanes, especially the 105s. And so we had a U-2, which was highly classified there at Benoit. They kept in the hangar and only pulled it out to go fly about twice a week. And they had C-130 that carried Firebeat drones on the wings that they could drop off. They would take pictures and they would pick them up in the water. And we sat there there were so many ridiculous things about that war. The stories you hear about it being controlled by the politicians is absolutely true.
Yeah.
But we knew what was going on up there. We knew when they had pilot training in China, when a new class came into North Vietnam and all that. And we sat there and we watched them build all those SAM sites around Hanoi.
Yeah.
And after they had them all built and everything, then the politicians finally cleared to strike them. Prior to that, you couldn't touch them.
Yeah.
You couldn't touch hardly anything in Saigon. And they lost a bunch of airplanes, F-4s, 105s, and so forth. And we had actually been fragged, which is an order, a military, a flying order, out of Saigon the day before, but it got screwed up and nobody told us about it until early that morning. And I was due to have my flight lead check out. I'd been flying element lead up to that time. And my flight commander decided he would let me go ahead and lead a force ship to Udorn. We did not know why we were going, just we were going. So I was lead, went over, got briefed by the wing commander. He couldn't tell me why we were going. But it was in the morning, and they didn't want us to go the northern route because of thunderstorms over the mountains there. So we dead reckoned out across the China Sea. I just ran across my records the other day. It was about a a 4.5-hour flight, and we were dead reckoning with no nav aids, anything, for almost 2 hours over the South China Sea.
What does dead reckoning mean?
Dead reckoning, where you just fly a heading for a time.
Okay.
And you draw your course on the map from A to B, and you get the winds, and you figure your drift and your ground speed and everything, and say, okay, it's 32 minutes away on a heading of 350. You fly 350 and check, and if everything worked out, you would be there.
Wow.
And with normally, nowadays you got radar.
Sure.
And even then back then we had some VORs, not many. It's a very high frequency, which you had a needle in your airplane that pointed to it, so you knew where you were.
Kind of like a homing beacon, right? It's kind of like you're homing
it was
in
like
on a signal.
Beacon. You had two of them. You could went from one to the other. You have two lines of where they crossed. You knew where you were.
Okay.
They generally put them close to an airport, so you could use it for your final approach and so forth. But we went in going over Bangkok. One of my wingmen had been running a little rich because his engine was running rough, so he was getting short of fuel. So going from Bangkok to Udorn, Karat was off to our right, about 40 miles. I said, okay, when we're abeam of Karat, if we're short of fuel, we'll turn and go in there. I assume there's Air Force there. We didn't know for sure. And they were. I remember vividly coming over the horizon, and there was 105s from one end of the ramp to the other. As soon as we landed, they come running out. They'd never seen an A1 for one thing. And that's when we found out why we were going to go up there and help provide air cover to pick up down pilots. So they quick turned us. We headed up to Thailand, to Udon. Got there, got briefed in, scared the hell out of us. We were supposed to fly up over Laos, which had radar controlled 57 millimeter anti-aircraft and all kinds of guns up there, to go into the Hanoi area for a low altitude cover for a possible pickup of a pilot. Well, then they decided they'd come in and say, no, that's off for now. They said, we're not going in until we get a radio contact with a down pilot. They still had a couple that they didn't know whether they were alive on the ground or not. And that was on again, off again, scared the hell out of us, on and off. And they finally said, okay, we'll put us on strip alert. So 2 of the 4, we had 4 airplanes. And we sat on the end of the runway in our aircraft, waiting to go in case. And the next day, my wingman and I got scrambled off. A Navy pilot got shot down in North Vietnam, north of the DMZ. And we flew out, met up with a helicopter, provided cover. It was an easy pickup. There was not much any ground fire. We made a couple strafing passes, picked him up, started back, and that's when I learned about Naked Fanny.
Tell us about what Naked Fanny is.
All that, this Naked Fanny, this, Naked Fanny, that. And we didn't, like I said, we didn't really know what the hell all was going on. But McNamara was on one of his trips to Vietnam, and he was in Udorn. And they wanted the helicopter to bring that Navy pilot back there for a photo op, which would have been just a super op. You know, guy just gets shot down, and we picked him up and brought him home. Yeah, how great we are. Well, the helicopter, the old HH-43, which is, I call it the Mixmaster, it's got twin rotors that intermash, and it's got short legs. It wasn't built for distance, and they could not make it back to Udorn with their fuel. And they kept talking about Naked Fanny. They were out of Naked Fanny. So I finally broke into the radio and said, what is this Naked Fanny you're talking about? And they told me, oh, it's Nakhon Phanom. It says right on the Thai-North Vietnam border. Oh, well, I've got a parachute and a helmet in my airplane. I can put him in that and I can fly him back. What kind of runway they got? Well, they only had a 3,000-foot pierced steel planking, steel runway. I can land on that, which we did. Pilot, all he had was a small cut on his forehead. The story I sent you got a picture of him. And we picked him up, flew him back to Udorn, landed, staff cars all around naturally. Never got a chance to talk to the Navy pilot at all. And they jerked us off to intelligence, and 2 full colonels sitting across the table said, tell us about this airplane you're flying. They had no idea anything about the A1. And of course, we told them its capabilities, how long it could fly, what all it could carry. Anything you could hang on an airplane, the A1 could carry. Navy torpedoes, all kinds of bombs and rockets, even nuclear.
How would that work? Because you're low aircraft who moves pretty slow. Could you escape a blast?
Exactly. When they told us we could carry nukes, we said, "How in the hell do we escape?" Well,
kamikaze time, I guess. Jeez.
But after the war, I'm running our SPAD net, which is a communication for all of us pilots. We got a couple of Navy guys that we hear they talk about launching the BOAR, BOAR. Well, they finally told me it stood for big ass rocket something or other. The nuclear bomb was rocket assisted.
Oh.
They would come in, pull up, and do a toss bomb. But when they released it, the rocket would fire and launch it out several miles. So then they would pull on up, do an Immelman turn, 180 turn, and head back to the carrier. And they always added, if it's still there. If we start throwing nukes around, the carriers they're going to get their big targets.
Sure.
But that was their, and we did, while I was at Herbert, we did a exercise on laying a minefield. We'd have 8 airplanes. We had floating smoke flares. We would drop, simulate mines. And we went out into the Gulf of Mexico. And it was really a complex operation where we would, one guy was a pathfinder. He would lead us, get to the IP, the initial point for the drop, lay down 9 flares, that the rest of us split up into 2 4-ships and then came in and spread out and random dropped all these flares. And it was it was designed to close off the mouth of a harbor.
Geez, so the A1 could even lay sea mines.
Yes.
And you're telling these guys about this incredible capability that the A1 has.
Anything.
Jeez.
In fact, when we were in Vietnam, there was talk early about mining Haiphong Harbor. And we said, oh, my God, I hope they don't check training records and see we're trained to do that. Let the Navy do that, damn it.
Yeah.
Let the Navy do that. But we never got called upon to do that. But it, like I say, the airplane could carry damn near anything you could hang on it. And for those who are interested in the airplane, on my presentation, I've got slides that show the A1 had 6 wing stations on each wing, outer wing, which each one could carry up to 250 pounds. There were 2 we called stubs stations in close to the fuselage on the inner wing that were heavier, that could carry 2,500 pounds. And then there was a centerline station which could carry 3,000 pounds. And the centerline station, those 2 stubs, were also plumbed for fuel. So you could hang external tanks on any one of those 3.
Wow.
And from the cockpit, you could select that external tank.
Jeez.
And we had 150-gallon and 300-gallon tanks. Our normal configuration in South Vietnam was a 150-gallon tank on the center line. Mm-hmm. And then we could hang stuff, all the other stuff. So we could make multiple passes if necessary. We had just a rule of thumb, especially day, you made 2 passes and haul ass. If you make enough passes over the same target, you can imagine if you've ever done any bird hunting, you gotta lead the birds. That's the problem. Yeah. Well, if you make enough passes over the same guy and he keeps shooting at you, he's going to figure it out. He's going to maybe shoot behind you. He's going to shoot you. He's going to finally figure it out. So 2 passes and haul ass. But our normal air-to-ground mission, 1 and 2 carried bombs, 8,000 pounds, as much as a B-17 did in World War II. And of all kinds of different bombs, fragmentation bombs, hard bombs, so forth and so on. We quit carrying rockets. They were too ineffective. The rocket warhead was only about like a hand grenade. And then 3 and 4 would carry napalm tanks. And so typical, and that was another thing, our tactics were too canned. We didn't vary them enough. we'd join up with a FAC over the target. He'd describe the target to us. He would generally mark it with a rocket with a white phosphorus warhead. You've seen, it gives you a smoke trail. And 1 and 2 would bomb the place, make 2 passes each. Then 3 and 4 would make 2 nape passes each. And then all 4 of us would make a couple of strafing 20 millimeter. And we'd join up with the forward air control, and he'd tell us what our BDA was, bomb damage assessment, of generally 1%. We rarely could see on the ground. If there were some hooches, he would just, but bodies you never saw. Only about 3 sorties out of 225 did I see anybody on the ground in the target area. But we destroyed a lot of villages, and I'm sure we killed a lot of people at it. Not villages, but hooches. And most of those were straw roofs and stuff. And more than once I've seen a 20 millimeter pass, the ammo go through the building and hit the ground out in the backyard, so to speak, and go off out there. So all they had to do is kind of push the grass back up when they got done, and no damage was done. Because the ammo we had was Korean War vintage ammo. Some of it was old, and it wasn't great. But the fuel tanks, also they had them. I never saw them, but there were 2 rubberized bladders that could go back in that blue room and put more fuel in there. And it's very interesting when we got our -1s finally that we could figure out cross-country nav and stuff. We sat there and figured if we hung 3 300-gallon tanks on there and put the bladders in the blue room and filled everything up and went to altitude and went to max cruise, we could stay airborne for 24 hours.
Wow.
Now, the problem was you ran out of oil in about 6 hours. So that tank, the rubberized bladders, had about a 40-gallon oil tank on top of it. So after, I think, 4 or 5 hours, you were supposed to flip a switch and put more oil back in your oil. The oil tank on it was 35 gallon, not quarts, 35 gallons of oil.
Oh my goodness.
The joke for A1, you pull into the gas station and say, check the gas and fill up the oil. But anyway, that was what we carried on the missions. And
so you're doing a lot of
to finish that story.
Go ahead.
After we briefed what we do, they didn't want us to go home. They wanted to keep us there naturally. Saigon finally said, you got to send them home. So we were only there about 5 days. We went back. Within a month, we were TDYing 4 airplanes over to Udorn a week at a time. And they'd rotate 4 airplanes every week. Mm-hmm. I left there mid-December of 65. Within 3 or 4 months, the whole squadron moved to Udorn. The whole 602nd. The first moved up to Pleiku, and then they eventually went over there. Once they put a runway and stuff into, which was only about a year later, into Nakhon Phanom, they moved over there. And that's where most of the stuff you hear about the search and rescue took place out of NKP. And it was not just search and rescue that they were there for. They flew close air support in the northern part of Vietnam and some in North Vietnam. And they did forward air controller missions to some of we call them the fast movers, the 100s and the F4s. They also did some reconnaissance along the trail, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They did all kinds of things, but if a pilot was down, they put together the mission to recover them, and they would pick up the Sandy call sign, which we do not know how that came about. Because when I was there, I don't know what our call sign was, but we would rotate call signs all the time. And the best thing we could come up with is on one of the SARS, search and rescues, it was a very good mission, saved somebody or so forth, and their call sign that day happened to be Sandy. And so pilots are very superstitious. So the Sandy call sign probably stuck. And to the end, if it was a search and rescue mission, they picked up the Sandy call sign, and it was generally a 4-ship. the 1 became Sandy 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the airplanes, and Sandy 1 became the on-scene commander. So you had the helicopter, and you generally had 130s or something higher up for radio communication and so forth. But the Sandy 1 became the on-scene commander and reconnoitered the area when it was safe for the helicopter to come in. It's interesting. I had one mission, which is a whole other story, on smoke tanks. We carried smoke tanks. I hadn't seen those since in my old World War II movies, where you'd see these fighters laying down a curtain along a tank convoy to hide them. And that became a very effective. The aircraft, they would carry a smoke tank because they could lay that down between, if there was ground troops firing at the pilot, they could put that down to hide that so the helicopter could get in and get out. Very effective.
Wow.
The 20 millimeter with troops on the ground was awesome. If you hit anybody with 20 millimeter, he'd probably disappear.
What was the hairiest SAR mission you ended up running while you were doing your tour?
That was really my only, quote, SAR mission, other than the one when I went, first time I ever saw smoke tanks, which was my good friend, Mel Elliott, was in my class. He had a gun malfunction that's caught fire, and his wing was on fire, and he had to bail out. The wing was burning off. And it was an evening, and he spent the night on the ground. And the next morning, they put an announcement on the PA system, we need a couple pilots, and Tom Dwelly and I jumped down to the flight line, and we were the first ones there. We got off, 2 of us. Went to the airplane, and we had these things that looked like nape cans that had snouts on the back. And we said, what in the world is this? They said, those are smoke tanks. When you trigger them, the fluid comes out and it smokes, creates a great white cloud. And, okay, that made sense. They said, but don't bring it back because it's very hazardous. When it hits the air, it fires it up. And it
must be white phosphorus.
Yeah,
it must be a white phosphorus delivery system.
A liquefied or something. But they said, don't bring it back. So we launched off. Well, there was not much ground fire there, and the copter got in and picked up Mel just about the time we got there, so we didn't have to expand or do anything. So we're heading back to Benoit. We're only about 30 miles north of Benoit. What are we going to do with this smoke? Generally, if you had bombs, you'd have to get a FAC or somebody to direct you to a safe area to drop your bombs to get rid of them. And so what are you going to do? Typical fighter pilot. What about skywriting? Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, well, what would we write? And doing letters, because once you triggered it, you couldn't stop it, Oh, well, I don't think we're right. Well, we're fighter pilot. We came up with the typical obscene graphics you see in men's room of the male's genitalia, balls and a thing.
Yes, sir.
And we figured, hey, piece of cake. We come down initial, or we come down wingtip to wingtip. We say, okay, go. He turns left, I turn right. We hit the smoke. We do a 360, come back together. Hey, we got the 2 circles. So now we go forward and cross at the end. And we're heroes. So we go back to Benoit at about 3,000 feet over Benoit, and we pull it up. We do it. Well, that smoke is designed to hide stuff. It's not like skywriting fluid. All we created was a big cloud. But to this day, Tom and I think if we'd have pulled that off, we'd be famous to this day as the guys that drew the cock and balls over Benoit.
Sir, you're famous in my book because that's
You may have to edit that out.
I don't want to. That's hilarious.
I've got it written out. I'll send that to you.
Okay. So we talk. I gotta ask. Did you ever have any ground fire connect with your aircraft? Did you ever get holes in your aircraft?
No. That's one of my proud things. I never took a bullet hole because I was I think it was due to skill and cunning. Like I said, one of the reasons I liked dropping the napalm was it was low level. Dive bomb, if you can imagine an airplane, we use a 60-degree dive bomb. You're coming down on a target with let's say a gunner, and you drop and then you pull up. Go back to leading a target. As you're pulling off and going away, you don't have much of a lead problem at all. When he's coming down at you, you're trying to hide. But as he dropped and pulls off, and that's where most of them would get hit. I did a lot of quail hunting and dove hunting up in Oklahoma. While the two bombers were bombing the target, we're orbiting the target area, and I'm checking all the ground and picking up things on the ground that I can see, pick out my line that I want to run in on. And I would, when it's time to make my pass, I would drop down to treetop level, right in the treetop level, about a mile from the target, and come motoring in. As I approach a target, I would pull up to 100, 200 feet because the fuse on the nape needed that altitude to arm, make my drop, and then I would look at the horizon, the tree line. If there was a low spot, I wanted to turn 20 to 30 degrees, and I would drop right back down to the ground level again and exit the track.
Stay low to avoid getting hit as you leave.
I'm anybody that got their gun out, bang, I'm by them already.
Yeah.
Wow. So I attributed that.
Did your group take any losses while you were operating during your tour? Did any of your guys
We lost 12 pilots the year I was there.
Oh my goodness.
And sad to say, at least half of them probably were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, like making multiple passes over the same target. And
did that affect unit morale? Because that's a pretty high loss rate. That's almost one a month almost when you even it out. What's the morale like of you guys?
It hurt. It generally got pretty drunk that night.
Yeah.
And but one of them really hit me bad. It was out of Chicago. He'd only been there a week. He'd just gotten cleared for combat, had his local area check.
Yeah.
He had two of them in the airplane. They were down in the Delta area. They were coming back, had an engine problem, landed at New Canto. Now it's a full-blood base, but they had just finished the runway and everything. Pardon me. They, I don't know why, but they ran off the end of the runway. There was a major ditch off the end of the runway, the water in it. It ran off the end of the runway, flipped over upside down, and actually they both drowned. And there was not much on the base. There was an Army helicopter, bless his heart. He came in, dropped a line, hooked onto the tail of the A1. I've got a picture in my memorabilia, and actually lifted up the tail enough to where they could get into the cockpit, but they had both already drowned.
Oh, no.
And Hawkins was the guy's name, out of Chicago. I exchanged a couple letters with his wife. I wanted to go visit when I came back, but I just never got to it. But that, being a brand new guy and everything like that, he was a nice guy. And I know it got pretty drunk at Benoit that night.
So did you ever have...
Our Catholic chaplain.
Yes, sir.
He was a character. He used to come. We had party in our hooches, which is our housing area. About 10 guys in there. And when we didn't have too many, we built a little party area up in one corner. But he would make the hooches on Saturday night and drink with us. And the deal was, his deal was, I'll come and drink with you guys on Friday night, but you got to come to church with me on Sunday. And he filled the church every Sunday.
That's a good deal.
It's a good deal. We offered to take him on a mission with us, but he never would go fly with us.
How do...
You're bringing out all these little anecdotes.
Well, this is kind of my
good.
philosophy. My philosophy is that I want to hear the little details, because the little details make it for me. Because that's the big stories are made of little stories. And I'm enjoying our time a lot. And I really am enjoying talking to you. So I just want to know. And I want to ask, if it's okay, how you guys lost a significant number of people. How has that stayed with you, even up until today?
Well, it varies. I could say it was a useless waste, Vietnam, but at the time, when I do my presentation, my visual presentation, my slides, I added a slide because most people now, even a lot of the active duty, don't know why we were in Vietnam or why we were flying the A1 when we were flying jets. So explaining that, I could very easily say, what a waste of people. We shouldn't have been there. But at the time, I've done enough research and stuff. It sounds ridiculous, but it seemed like the thing to do. Yeah. And I could see it. Even Kennedy was president when a lot of this clandestine stuff was going on before he was killed, and Johnson came in. It was a very political war. In fact, we would get directives from Washington almost daily. They had a hotline from our Combat Alert Center. The first strikes up north, which was a big milestone, which was before all the jets went north. The A1s, we sent 4 of ours along with the Vietnamese. They had a whole squadron that went north. And that was, everybody was in their airplanes, and it got canceled twice, delayed a day. For whatever reason, I don't know. There is good intelligence out there briefing that Washington was telling the Scandinavia, the Red Cross, what country, the big
Geneva, Switzerland. Yeah, Geneva, Switzerland.
Because of the Red Cross involvement in Switzerland, that they were telling them about some of the strikes, when we were going to strike and we were going to do something, and that it was then fed back to the Vietnamese. And I can believe that was happening during the political activity. Yeah. And it was, like I say, it was really controlled from there. It was really interesting to see when we went into Iraq, they turned the military loose. They said, "Hey, you know what to do? You go do it. We're not going to tell you how to handle this." And it came out a hell of a lot better. Now, as far as the war goes, beat the hell out of them, but we made a few mistakes. And politically, was it the thing to do? Bush took a lot of flack over in the past. After that, that's politics. That's not.
The fog of war. The fog of war is kind of the way I see it.
But you asked early in the interview, you were leading up to my career in the Air Force and how I liked it and all that stuff. I was expecting you to come up with, would I recommend it, nowadays, or what do I think now? I got second thoughts about that. It is what I'm telling you, my days in the Air Force, what I did all the way through retirement. It is not the same Air Force. I only live about 30 minutes south of Randolph with the Medallions, which has their headquarters on base. I get on base almost weekly. When I was doing consulting work, my compatriot and I, we realized we had to stay current with what was going on in the Air Force as things changed. Today's Air Force does not compare to the Air Force that I grew up in. I say I grew up. It's a totally different operation.
How so?
And a lot of it I don't like, not because it changed, but I think it's bad for the service. Most of the service people a lot of them feel the same way. But you see it not only in the military, but on the street. San Francisco, New York, the woke universe and all this stuff. The world is changing, and it's the military. And like I used to tell people, they complain about somebody in the military did something, bad. I said, the military is a cross-section of the guys on the street. That's where they come from. The military, they're not all angels. There's some good guys in there. There's some bad guys in there. There's a whole bunch of guys down the middle. It's from an engineering, the old bell-shaped curve. In nature and natural, most things follow a bell-shaped curve. There's some extremes at both ends, and there's a whole bunch in the middle. But the Air Force, it's not the same. And if somebody is interested, wants to be, I would not tell them not to, but I would discuss it with them. And they really, even years ago, they need to know what they're getting into. When I was up in New England, the people in New England don't believe there's anything outside of New England. The kids never leave home. I've had to counsel, a couple of my friends asked me to talk to their kids who are thinking about the military. And so I've talked to them. And anyway, it's at the time, I say, can you live with a regimented life, like you're going to be told what to do and all this stuff? But the Air Force, it still has a hell of a lot to offer. If a person pays attention and wants to learn and get what they can out of it, education-wise, is tremendous. They can come out the Air Force with a real trade if they're clever and know what they want to do. But right now, a lot of people, they say, I'm going to college, so what are you going to do? Well, why? They don't know. Yes,
what? How did? No. I just have to ask. How did your time in Vietnam shape you into who you ultimately became and are?
Well, probably the biggest thing that I know happened, I was pretty much a straight arrow when I went to Vietnam. Coming out of pilot training and coming out of the training command was very regimented, standardized, and so forth. And I was pretty much straight arrow. And I learned, hey, the Air Force, you got to get the job done.
Yeah.
And years later, in the Air Defense Command, pull an alert and everything, somebody higher up says, well, you guys were putting in too many hours. We had an idiot to come down. You can't log more than 50 hours or 60 hours a month, or I don't know what it was. But guys, you'd lie. You just lie.
Yeah.
You didn't log some of the time. This is work time, not flying time. It was a real problem with guys coming out of the Air Force Academy because they were,
yeah.
This was totally foreign to them. But
so you learned how to bend the rules a little bit.
I won't say bend the rules, but go after it.
I see.
Don't hesitate.
Break rules when necessary. What about that? Does that fit a little better?
Yeah, there's a certain limit, but
yeah,
that I wouldn't go over. But I was much more aggressive, let's say, and so forth, in what I wanted to do and so forth.
Was there a specific time during your service in Vietnam where you applied this concept of getting after it when necessary that really worked out well for you? Is there one that kind of comes to mind just now thinking about that?
Well, I don't know, but some things, when we were there, you were not authorized to go back to the United States on leave. Although we all had our 30 days of leave, most guys only took, 2 weeks. And you could go to Hong Kong, you could go to Australia, you could go to all the countries, but you were not authorized to go to the United States. I went home twice. And a lot of guys did. In fact, SAC with their U-2, they would come in every 3 months with a 130 to swap crews, ground crews and everything, out of Mather Air Force Base. And the assistant ops officer, Lieutenant Colonel, he had a log. You could, if you had to leave during that time, you could go see him and get put on a log they would always have 5 or 6 extra seats on that airplane. And
catch a flight home on a C-130 for U-2 crews.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And
Can't imagine.
There's stories along there.
What were these U2 crews like? Did you ever get to talk with them? Because like the U2,
I fly with one right now. One of my
man. Ooh, do you think he'd come on my show?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, that's a good thing. He would do that.
You know,
talk to you about flying a U2.
You know, when we're off the air, we'll talk about this. But you know, I'm fascinated with the Cold War because I think it's something people of my generation need to understand, and they need to understand it beyond just like something you have to read in school and you don't want to read it and you want to go do something with your buddies as soon as the bell rings. I'm talking about like understand that it was real. Understand that people such as yourself were trained, you know, to learn how to like deliver a nuclear device. You know, like those guys you were talking to in the Navy. Like we're in an A1 and we need to be able to have the capacity to deliver a nuclear weapon with rocket assist, and we're going to figure out how to survive it. So the U2 story is just, that's a whole world.
I'll make it happen for you. We'll talk that offline.
Copy that.
Easy to do. Easy.
You know, let's get back on track here. You know, I want to just kind of ask you, before we move away from Vietnam, I just kind of want to ask, is there any mission in particular that you would like to run us through that was particularly memorable in terms of, you know, the hairiness factor? Because hairy stories are always interesting.
Well, a couple missions which were very interesting. But before I tell you those two, the one you've maybe heard about flying, it's hours and hours of boredom separated by moments of stark terror.
I've heard that, yeah.
I've got a story on that.
Okay.
Napalm run. I didn't use my checklist on the pre-strike. One of the steps in the pre-strike is to switch your fuel tank from external to main fuel tank. I didn't do that. And I've done just like I described to you. I'm coming in, pull up, just honest to God, ready to hit the pickle button to drop him, and the engine quit. I had run out of fuel from the drop tank because I wasn't running on the main. And at full power, that engine doesn't go sputter, you know, quit. It just like you turn a light switch off.
Boom.
Nothing. And instant terror.
And what's your altitude right now? What's your altitude?
I'm about 100 feet.
Oh my God. So you have a complete engine failure at 100 feet.
Right in to ready to drop, and the whole area is in flames and smoke and crap coming up. And I'm going down with a line of hooches I'm going to drop napalm on to burn them down. And the engine quits. Well, instinct, training, I immediately pull up to get altitude. Of course, don't have an ejection seat. Going to have to go over the side. Well, I'm not near high enough to do that. But the Navy had taught us that the A1 will waterland real well. There was rice paddies all right out with, you know, around the village. I immediately picked a rice paddy. I think, hey, I can put it down in that rice paddy. I can glide to that rice paddy. And of course, the checklist procedure is when the engine stops is you're supposed to pull the throttle, the mixture, and the prop and everything back, turn your boost pump on, change your fuel tank. Well, I just, with one swoop, none of that BS. Everything in that cockpit will full forward. All four levers and everything. Oh, and I'm looking, and the instant terror, just the engine quitting, I've got it all figured out. I'll land in that, I'll belly land, come to a stop, and I'll get out of the airplane and go hide. And I'm sitting there thinking, that hooch, that little village right behind me is all in flames, and we just bombed the hell out of them.
Right.
Those people, I'm only about a mile from there. Yeah. They are going to be pissed.
Yeah.
I can imagine with their sickles and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And about that time, the engine started.
What happened? Was it that you'd switched fuel tanks, or was it that
ran out of fuel?
No. When the engine came back on,
well, yeah, the fuel, the prop's still running, and so it got fuel and it started.
Now let me ask
with
this.
A big bang.
Forgive me for my ignorance here, but I'm intoning that why you switch from your external to your main when you're doing a run like you were was because I think the fuel in the external tank will like move away from the intake, or is that what happened? So it got momentarily starved?
It's just because you got all that fuel internally, and there's no gauge on the external tank.
I see.
You don't know how much fuel's in there.
I see. So it just was serendipitous. It was at that moment
you
ran out your drop tank.
One of those weird things that happens.
And then, so how much time was this between you ran out and the engine came back on? In seconds, you had run through all of this.
In the brain, it was an eternity.
Time slowed down.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And that's true. I go back. Have you ever done bowling?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, if you bowl a while, you get to the point where when that ball hits the pins, you can actually see those pins flip over other pins and so forth like that. That's the way when you get good at flying, air to ground, you're strafing or something, you see stuff that anybody in the airplane they would never see that. And so that stuff happens fast and your brain, clicks it out.
And in those milliseconds, you had just, now this is something I want to touch on. The motto of this episode, on this podcast episode, I think may be bend rules when necessary, because you said the check was to go throttle everything back, go through your check, but you threw everything forward and caught it, and that probably saved your ass.
I knew I did not have time to go through all a normal engine start.
Bend rules when necessary.
I was also very worried.
Yeah.
Because if you know anything about engines, if you're running out of fuel, the engine is sucking air that's why it quits. And if your carburetor and your lines are full of air, you can get what they call an airlock.
Yeah.
Unless something can push it through or suck the fuel, which it did.
Was the A1 engine a carburetor engine?
No, it's fuel injected.
Okay, good. My first car was a carburetor car, and I love those cars, but I'm happy to have fuel injection now.
But I know one of the guys a couple of months before had at altitude coming back from the target, cruising, went back to external, and he ran out and the engine quit, and he got a vapor lock for a while. And from 3,000 feet, he was gliding down. He got down to almost 1,000 feet before he got the engine started. Jeez. And so that was in my back memory banks also. The other two sorties that were that I remember very well is we got one day they said sent 4 of us all the way up to Da Nang, which is almost to the DMZ, and they loaded us with a bomb we called an ELDA, or sometimes called a lazy dog. It looked like a 500-pound bomb, but it was actually a clamshell, and inside of it there was about 10-pound paper bags full with little steel. They're not darts. They look like a 45 caliber pistol round with a little fin on the back.
That's like a flechette, almost like a flechette round.
Well, a flechette, yeah, but a flechette, most of those were like darts with points on them. This was blunt, just strictly kinetic energy when it hit anything. And they said it would hit the ground. We dropped it at about 3,000. They said that it would hit the ground with the same kinetic energy as a 45 caliber pistol round. So it would go right through a person. And it would lay a cigar-shaped pattern the size of a football field. Anyway, we didn't know what was going on. We got up to Da Nang, landed, and what was going on, there was an Army convoy, had been attacked and overrun the day before, or early that morning, the day before, and they thought they had taken 2 prisoners from the Army, when they overran them. And so we were going to hit up the area and hopefully help the Army get in there and get them out. So that's why we had these things.
Yeah.
So we went out and there was a valley, and we made a pass down both sides of the valley, the four of us, and you would roll in, and there was no explosion or nothing. You'd drop them from about 4,000 or 5,000 feet at about 3,000, clamshell open, and it would scatter them out, and they would pepper the ground. We all made those passes. Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything, nothing. We went back, didn't think any more about it. Next day, we went back to Benoit, and it was a week later. I'm into intelligence debriefing after every mission you debrief. And they said, weren't you in that sortie that went to Da Nang last week? Yes, I was. Well, read this report. And what had happened, we had made those passes, and guys on the ground, they had the two prisoners were actually there. The VC had them helping them recover bodies, which both services like to recover dead bodies.
Yeah.
They were helping pick up dead bodies when we made these dry passes, they thought. But they saw guys drop dead. You know, those pellets hit them. Didn't understand that. That night, Puff the Magic Dragon, which
Yes.
was C-47 with the miniguns,
Yes.
and this was back when we had the bombing shortage, which they would never admit to. You've probably seen the picture of the A1 with the toilet hanging on the Navy.
No, I've never seen this.
I have to send you one of those. Anyway, we were short of ammo, and normally they put every 10th round was a tracer, so you'd see these
Yeah.
lights going out, but they could see where they were going.
Yeah.
They were short of ammo, so they had 100% tracers. So it was like a laser beam.
Oh my God.
And the C-47, they sent it out that night, and he hosed down the edges. And the story went on that it so confused them, they thought we had a secret invisible weapon. You know, because we made these dry passes and guys it'd kill people. And then this guy's got this thing shining on the ground at night. And the two guys escaped. It confused them so much they were able to escape and told the story. And
Powerful psyops.
yeah, well, I told them, I said, hey, now the time we had you mentioned the magic word, we had psyops aircraft there, the old couriers that dropped leaflets and had speakers on them. We said, hey, get up there and drop all these leaflets saying we got this death weapon. If you don't surrender, we're going to zap your ass with this laser. And of course, the Air Force couldn't react to that. But anyway, on the way back, this is the second mission. On the way back, we get a radio call. One of our old pilots who wanted to be a FAC was a ground FAC with the Army who had gone in with helicopters, and they were trying to get out of there, pick them up and take them out. And they were surrounded and taking ground fire.
Yeah.
And they said, great, we got to fly to Fort. Can you suppress the ground fire? We said, hey, we're just ferrying back from Da Nang, and we're clean. We have no bombs, no guns or nothing. We didn't rearm before we went home, which was dumber than hell. So what are we going to do? So we said, okay, we played the game I mentioned earlier, our can tactics. Mm-hmm. We told the FAC to come over there, fire a spotting rocket. We all did our 360s. We all made a couple of dry passes, jazzed the throttle, ridiculous, but we jazzed the throttle and pulled off. And the VC backed off, and the guys got out. They were able to get the choppers in and get the guys out of there. So that was a couple. Other than that, it was pretty much routine air to ground. Like I said, beat the troops back. Well, the one I got my DFC on was a convoy at night, and they were being overrun. And it was only 30 miles north of Benoit. And we were on night alert. It wasn't a fort, but they scrambled us off. And the guys, they were going to get overrun and killed. And they wanted us to drop bombs on these guys close.
Yeah. And
we said, hey, dive bombing, your circular error probability for qualifying is about 140 feet on a controlled range. We said, boy, we're liable to hit them. So I told my wingman, Tom Dwelly again, I said, let's level bomb. Let's go by at about, 1,500 feet. and we may be long or short, but we won't be left or right. We won't. We could see the ground fire. We could see ground fire going out and going in, so we knew it almost exactly. So we did that. Oh, that's great. Move it on in. We kept moving it in closer. We were afraid we're going to hit you guys.
Yeah.
And they backed off.
Yeah.
But while we were doing it, the first time we ever saw it, they were firing mortars at us. And what they were doing, they would put a time fuse on the mortar round and fire straight in the air. Oh. And it would explode, in the
poor man's flak.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I one time I saw the two of us, one would make a pass where the other was up on downwind, and of course we'd turn the lights off so they couldn't see you. And I noticed about the time Tom was pulling off, I saw these flashes. And it looked just like on the 4th of July, the rockets they launched that just go bang. Yeah. You see that flash and then the big bang. That's exactly what they looked like. Of course, you couldn't hear them. But I said, hey, Tom, watch after me when I make my pass. He says, oh, my God, there's stuff going off. So we got back to intelligence, and they were very pleased with us. They said, we had heard intelligence and rumors that they were doing that. And you guys are the first ones to confirm. They said, yeah, they're doing it. And but of course, the only thing they couldn't see us, so they were really just firing on the sound, which was they were well behind us, Yeah. So I didn't. But if they perfected a little bit more, it could be hazardous. So there's a few little missions. Most of them were relatively routine, air to ground covering, and we didn't see much in the area, but. They would never let us shoot any water buffalo down in the Delta area. Yeah. Because it would piss off the natives, the good guys. And then later, towards the end, they found out that the VC were bringing water buffalo down along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, using them like trucks with supplies of stuff hanging on them. And it was good when they got them down there and unloaded them, they could eat them. So it was like a commissary also. So they finally said, if you get water buffalo, you can shoot them. And I did. I got a chance to shoot one.
Are these with 20 millimeters?
Yes. And
what does a 20 millimeter do to a water buffalo?
That 20 millimeter hit that water buffalo, it was like he had swallowed a hand grenade.
Oh.
I could see body parts rotating. You talk about bowling, I could see body parts rolling. And like I said, if you hit a man in the body, he would just probably almost disappear.
Oh my God. I can't imagine hitting a water buffalo with a 20 millimeter. Jeez. And how often did you guys do this?
Well, that's the only time I ever got a chance to shoot a water buffalo, and I never heard anybody else. However, we did have one sortie. We went up almost to the DMZ on the Ho Chi Minh Trail because they got intelligence said that they were bringing in 105 cannons. Yeah. On elephants, using elephants as pack mules. So they said, if you see any elephants, you can shoot them. So, oh man, we were all fired up, got to shoot an elephant. Never saw any elephants.
Oh man.
Ridiculous. Sometimes it was ridiculous. It scared the shit out of you some other times, pardon my French, but and other times it was damn near funny. Sure. My wife, she can't understand why when I watch MASH on TV, I laughed my butt off because it is so funny. And she said, what's so funny? I said, I lived in that. I was there.
I really appreciate you running us through a few missions and running us through a few really memorable kind of hairy missions. I want to touch on your career after Vietnam. So you were there. If I heard you correctly, you arrived in December of '64, served in country until December of '65. Did I get that correctly?
Yep.
What happened after? Where'd you go?
I got an assignment to F-101s, the Voodoo, in the Air Defense Command.
Okay.
As an interceptor.
So you went from low and slow to F-101 intercept, which is high altitude, really fast. What was that transition like?
It was no problem. The first thing the guys that were going to 101s or 106, my good friend who also went on the speaking tour with me, he's just recently passed away though. He was going to 106. You went to Tyndall to 102s to learn intercepts and radar control and all that stuff for, it was about almost 5 months. Got about 80 hours in the 102. You first, because it was designed for recent graduates, which was funnier than hell because here we are, old heads. Both of us had been instructor pilots for several years, and then we'd been to Vietnam, so we wasn't putting up with this crap, this straight over shit. And they put us in the T-Bird. We were supposed to get 10 hours in the back seat flying instruments, which we loved that because that's what we used to teach, And then we got into 102 and did intercepts, learned all the intercept stuff. And then you went to Tyndall for, I think it was only about 6 weeks for basically a checkout. We only got about 10 rides, 106 or 101. And it was to check you out in that aircraft. We already knew how to use the radar and everything. It was pretty much like the 102. So it was getting used to starting and flying and doing the 101. And from there, I got assigned to Hamilton in north of San Francisco. And I was there for 2 years flying the 101, which was enjoyable. San Francisco was great. I figured, boy, this is great. I'll be here for a while. In 2 years, I got orders to go on exchange tour to Canada. And I couldn't understand because that's another thing I never volunteered for. I found out a few years later from personnel, they said, you were the only one in the Air Force qualified. I said, you can't believe it. In the whole Air Force? Well, they didn't want to send jet pilots to reassign them stateside because then they couldn't send them to Vietnam. So all of us that came back from Vietnam early in the war didn't spend more than 2 years at our first assignment.
So this is like what, 1967, 68, 69?
Let's see, I came back in 66, 68.
Okay, so 68. So the war is like at its zenith.
I went to Canada 69, 70.
Wow.
And they said they had to have, the person had to be qualified in the 101, been to Vietnam, and married for exchange. Sure, they wanted a husband and wife. And he said, you're the only one in the whole damn Air Force. Like my buddy, he went to 106s, And so I got that exchange tour, which was a lot of fun. It was a 2-year vacation, hunting and fishing. I became the squadron guide. And from that, I wanted to stay in the Air Defense Command, but they sent me back to the training command again, to Del Rio, Texas. Now, there's a cultural shock from Vancouver Island to Del Rio, Texas. And I was sent there as a T-38 squadron commander, no, not a flight commander. And when I got there, they wanted to send me back to instructor pilot training because it had been over 6 years since I instructed or some ridiculous number. So I went down to the squadron, and one of the guys I flew with advanced years before asked him if it was still as screwed up as they thought. He says, yeah, it's even worse. And I had gotten a call the day before and said, would you like to be the OIC officer in charge of the functional check flight section, FCF section? And he said, yes. And I called him up and said, I'll take the job. And I'd put in for a waiver to go to the instructor school. And with my record and some guys I knew at Air Training Command Headquarters, they granted me a waiver. And I got waivers on a lot of education. And so I became the officer in charge of the FCF section and got local checkout in the T-38 and again in the T-37 and did that for another 2 years. And they alerted me, personnel, you're going back to Vietnam.
Yeah, because this is like early 70s now.
That would have been, 72. And I said, my God, but I said, what am I going to fly? Oh, you're not going to fly. You're going to be a maintenance advisor in Saigon. And I said, oh, God, I want to fly. No, he says, it's a great job. You advise the Vietnamese maintenance on what to do and everything, and they'll love it and everything, but they won't do it. But it doesn't rub off on you, and you'll get all kinds of awards and decorations and all that stuff. Oh, okay. I alerted my family we're going to leave. And about 3 weeks later, they called me back and said, Vietnam is off. You're going to Korea. Because once again, they had a problem in maintenance. By now, I'm a fully qualified maintenance officer.
And what's your rank at this point?
I was still a major.
Okay.
And so they sent me to Korea as a field maintenance squadron commander because, again, they had screened records looking for people with outstanding records because they didn't have any senior maintenance officers in Korea at the time. And all the generals that got together and complained about it. Okay, personnel said, well, we'll fix that. We'll send you some qualified people. So I went there, and I thought it was a good chance to get commander on my record. But when they found out I'd been a maintenance control officer, they put me in the maintenance control position. Yeah. So at the 3rd Fighter Wing at Kunsan, we had 3 squadrons of F-4s. At that time, Vietnam was still going on. I had 1 squadron TD-wide to Karat, 1 squadron TD-wide up to Osan, which left me with only 1 squadron of my airplanes, and the Air Force decided to help me out, and they TD-wide a squadron of F-4s from Kadena into Kunsan. Okay. So there I am. I got a squadron. Man, it was the most screwed up mess. And the wing was on its butt when I got there, and I had a lot of help from a lot of good people, but we got it turned around.
Really?
By the time we left, we were at the top of the heap. And but I couldn't find an assignment. I looked and looked. This is where the straight is. So I just started calling people. I didn't mind jumping the chain of command or something. But with the colonel I'd worked for there, he was back at the training command on the IG team, and he called me up and said, we're cutting orders. You're coming to ATC headquarters on the IG team.
Wow. You're
a fully qualified maintenance officer. So I was going to be a maintenance inspector. So next 2 years I did that.
When did your career with the Air Force come to an end, and what prompted that?
Right after that, I'm getting close to the end.
I see.
But the IG team, I told the colonel, I said, I don't know all the regulations. He says, yeah. He says, but I know you've been enough of them, you know where to look and all that stuff. So I did pretty well on the IG team. I thought, I would learn something, and I wanted to then get back as a chief of maintenance in the training command. Well, while I was there, they upgraded that. It was a lieutenant colonel because I made lieutenant colonel while I was on the IG team.
Oh, okay.
That was a lieutenant colonel position. Well, the training command changed the whole organization and upgraded that to a full colonel. So none of those jobs were available for me. So I extended a little bit on the IG team, and while I was extended, they were acquiring the new simulator, the motion-based visual system for the T-38 at the training command. And I had gained a reputation for inspecting contract operations. So they made a switch and moved me over to the headquarters staff to be in charge of the maintenance team on that. And then I moved over to the aircraft maintenance. I was the aircraft maintenance officer for a couple of years. And when I got passed over for full colonel, because I was caught in the controlled OER period, if you talk to people during that time, they could only have a certain percent of 1s and 2s. And it screwed a lot of people in, like on IG teams or headquarters jobs where they hand selected the better people, and then half of them had to get an average OER. And that's what killed me there. So I got passed over the first time. The general I was working for, the 1-star, he guaranteed me a promotion, and I couldn't think of a good full colonel job available. And when I got orders, they said, you got orders. They couldn't tell me where it was. It was a classified assignment. But my CBPO, my papers and personnel would be out of Tyndall, and all I could envision was a downrange South Atlantic test place, and I didn't want to do that. So that's when I retired.
Wow.
So I put my papers in, retired, went to work with industry, went to GTE on the MX missile as a logistician, spares and training and tech manuals. When they changed the basing mode, originally they were going to do the shell game where they're going to move them all around different places. When they said we're going to put them in Minuteman silos, that job kind of dried up. I had a hard time convincing GT that was true, but it was. So then I went over with Raytheon on a Track 170 troposcatter radio program, and then into the Milstar, the satellite communication thing. I was there almost 5 years. Then they turned the B-1 back on, which Carter had canceled. The outfit that had the electronic countermeasure system was on Long Island, and they come around, headhunters called me up, and I fought them for a while because I knew AIL, who was the contractor for that, was in trouble. But they finally offered me so damn much money and everything. I took the job, went to Long Island. I lasted 2 years and said, that's it. I'm going back to Texas. Came back to Texas, worked for a couple small 8As, the minority companies. And then I got into consulting for a few years, writing contracts for basically aircraft maintenance for several companies. Sikorsky primarily, when they got into the aircraft maintenance bit. And finally decided dealing with the government was a piece of you-know-what, and quit consulting. And I'm here in Lavernia, Texas, and said I got involved in communities. And right now I'm up to my you-know-what in community activities. I was on about 4 boards at one time. I'm down to the water company now. But I'm still very active with the A1 Skyraiders Association. I handle all their communication, their records, keeping track of everybody. And the Dedalian organization, I was on their board for a while. And the water company. Yeah. And because I do get satisfaction from doing that. And I want to get back to doing my primary hobby of jewelry work. And somewhere along there, I bought an airplane and started flying again. I didn't fly for almost 15 years.
Wow.
And worked with a guy over at Kingsbury who builds World War I aircraft. And my jewelry work, I could cast parts for an airplane as good as I could cast a ring for somebody. And so I did that and got hooked in with him. And he said, well, don't you want to fly? And that's when I got the RV-8. Home build, I bought it.
Yeah. And what was the process like to build the RV-8? How long did that take?
I didn't build it. I was, like I said, I was my age. I said, I don't want to take 2 or 3 years to build the damn thing, which I could have done. But you could get quick build kits, which are partially assembled. For to be a home built, you have to document that you built at least 51% of it. So you don't have to go the certified route, which this one only had 300 hours when I bought it. It was an F-100 driver. He was getting overage, didn't think he could pass his physical, and he put it up for sale, and I bought it. And I tore the whole thing apart. Everybody said you should have built one, but I said, there's stories guys that build them in a year that just to work their butt off and put together. I'd say the average time to build one is probably somewhere between 2 to 3 years. Some guys have taken 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
But it's a great airplane. I think I've got at least another year of flying before I sell it and end my flying career and get back to doing some of the other things.
Wow. It's been
talking to guys like you.
Well, it's just so much fun to get to speak with you and hear about, of course, this is the Modern Military History Podcast. So we're going to talk about Vietnam. We're going to talk about the combat, and we're going to talk about the military history. But, what really kind of unexpectedly fascinated me was your story of being a young guy consumed with a passion for flight and how you pursued that, because I've always been just so passionate about military history. And when I was a young kid, I would spend my allowance on books about World War II airplanes. My local hobby shop had like a selection of books that were mostly pictures of World War II planes. And it just so happened that one of those books cost what my weekly allowance was. So every week I'd make the pilgrimage, I'd go down and I'd get a new book. So it was just really unexpectedly pleasant to be able to connect with that in seeing that not just in me, but also in you. But the beauty of it with your career is that you got to realize that.
How about model airplanes? Did you get into that?
I just spent $40+ on Tamiya paints and some more stuff because I just moved into my first apartment, and that's what's behind me, kind of grayed out. And I really want to get back into modeling. But armor modeling, aircraft modeling, my dad and I, my first model I ever built was a B-25 Mitchell that we bought and we made together. So I'm really into that stuff. And I really want to fly you mentioned a P-51 or a Spitfire. I know that they have aircraft that are configured to have a seat in the back of P-51s, and same thing for Spitfires. So I would love to be able to do that one day. But yeah, it's just been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, because the fact that you committed to your passion as much as you did and how that defined your career, talking about doing experiments in B-52s and sorting out the electrical and getting to spar with F-86 Sabres, and all before you got into the military is just amazing. So this time has just been wonderful. Thank you so much for making the time and coming on.
I enjoyed it.
It's been an honor and a privilege. It's been an honor and a privilege.
You've got my whole life documented. I don't have anything for a follow-up.
Copy that.
Unless you want to call me in a few years.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
I will get you that U2 pilot set up.
Copy that.
Cross my mind. You're talking about the current. At our last A1 reunion here in San Antonio, we went out to Randolph. They've got about 4 or 5 squadrons out there. They're training instructor pilots in the T-37, which is now the T-6. They went to the T-6, the T-38, and their T-1, which is their biz jet they do for primers. But they also have a squadron they call fighter lead-in. If somebody graduates the T-38s, if they're going to go to fighters, they go over there for 3 or 4 months and they teach them air-to-air tactics and actually air-to-ground. Preliminary air to ground. We went out and visited them because they're the guys now. A lot of them go to A-10s, which have picked up the modern SAR mission. So if you're interested, I could get you somebody out there you could interview on what's going on now in that area.
Yes, please. The legacy of the A1 pilots is just indisputable in terms of the impact that guys such as yourself have had on our military, and the impact A1s and A1 pilots, A1 units had on the Vietnam War is something that needs to be documented. I have spoken with enough guys who served on the ground who repeatedly say the SPAD pilots saved our bacon, the SPAD pilots helped us get out, that I wanted to get in touch with men such as yourself. So again, it has been an honor, a privilege. I'm going to cap off this podcast episode, but remain on the call here after we cap it off, and we'll do just a little brief debrief if that's okay.
That's fine with me, and if somebody wants to talk to me offline or anything, they can look me up. I've got a YouTube video, short. It's only about 15 minutes that they recorded at our last 2-year reunions ago. And there's several other A1 pilots on there. There's been a resurgence in interest in Vietnam in recent years. I went 15 years and never really talked to anybody about it. But recently I've talked my presentation about 6 different organizations the last year or two. So
thank you for doing that.
Enjoyed it. Hope somebody gets something out of it. It was an enjoyable afternoon for me. And I'll talk to you later.
Copy that. Well, this has been another episode of the Modern Military History Podcast, we have featured Mr. John Larrison, retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, A1 pilot, all kinds of aircraft. I was going to list off the different kinds of aircraft that you flew, but I can't do it. You flew so many. Thank you again. It's been an honor and a privilege. I just can't say it enough. It's been an honor. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Goodbye. Thank you.